On the twins' birthday, a prophecy came true that came down to one of the families. One of the younger sisters, Noxia, grew up to be a beautiful lady with silver hair and a beautiful smile. At an early age, she showed outstanding abilities, including the control of the element of water. She was loved by everyone, and many considered her the chosen one of fate, whom God himself loved. And her twin sister, Thanasia, had black hair that resembled the night sky in color. She was often the center of attention of people's ridicule, because Thanasia did not have such features as her younger sister. This story was the most interesting topic for gossip, and every time she walked away, the others laughed at her even louder. Everything changed when Thanasia could not withstand the pressure and watched everyone with an arrogant face. The girl threatened that if she heard at least one bad word in her direction again, then they would not escape punishment. The last clear memory of the main character was how she quit her boring job to go on a trip. And the plane that was flying to its destination crashed and exploded during the flight, after which the girl died. When she woke up, she saw people in front of her who called her Lady Thanasia. The girl got into her own novel, which told about completely different twin sisters. Compared to her younger sister, the older sister had nothing special about her, but over time, she coveted what she had. She dreamed of becoming Noxia. If she wielded exactly the same power, she would gain everyone's love. Her awakening in a new body meant only one thing. That was that she got into the body of the heroine of the novel and became a member of the Brelov family. And from that moment on, a new life began for her, although at first she could not accept reality. In the novel, Thanasia always compared herself to Noxia and constantly went through hell, but her jealousy disappeared. Now she lives in luxury that she could not afford in her previous life, and she did not need more. Her joy was short-lived. Listening to the maids behind her talking about the latest sensational events, she couldn't help but feel anxious. People who are used in their experiments began to disappear in the Empire, and the number of missing people is growing every day. The backstory of the novel told about the next war, where the main character dies from the main villain, Asken. He was among the missing people who were sent for experiments and later became a monster. She was about to leave the palace when suddenly a servant knocked on the door, looking for his mistress. A young man with golden eyes and tattoos on his neck stood in front of her. Thanasia recognized him as the same Asken. Her face was filled with horror because he should not be here, since in the original novel they were not supposed to meet. Askana was known for how he escaped from the lab, but the girl did not know that he was her slave. Thanasia let him go, and the servants behind her did not understand how their mistress had let him go. They said that the lady usually tested her servant and often mocked him in prison, which made the girl admit her mistake, for which she died. Asken felt deep resentment at being forcibly held captive and treated like a pet. In the original, Asken escaped from the Empire's laboratory and was caught again after some time, the reason for which she could not remember. Thanasia was worried about her life and could not make a mistake. She wanted to find a way to survive with all her desire. That night, the heroine had a dream that she first found herself in the world of the novel. In a dream, she found Asken in a slave market who was sitting in a cage as decor. Her attention was immediately attracted by a tattoo that was engraved on her neck with an ancient tongue. The girl realized that special powers had been invested in his body and realized that she had a chance to gain power like Noxia. His sister had a rare talent that aroused admiration and a slight share of envy among others, and so she began to research Asken to solve the mystery of the appearance of magical power. Every day, Thanasia resorted to physical violence, trying to get information from him about his talents and capabilities. Asken, showing steadfastness and deep endurance, restrained the manifestation of his capabilities, enduring each blow struck. Despite numerous attempts, one of the lashes was blocked, and this aroused Thanasia's interest. It was the ability to make one's body steel, giving a great advantage in defense. The girl suddenly woke up from fear, taking what she saw in the dream as a nightmare and could hardly catch her breath. What she saw was an echo of the past, imprinted in this body before her incarnation in it. According to the plot of the novel, having learned about the abilities of the young man, there was a high probability that she would sell him to the Empire for military purposes. In the morning, Thanasia visited Asken so that he would forgive her and prevent her from repeating the mistake. The young man was surprised by the lady's appearance in his room, as he had not been warned of her visit. The girl announced the coming changes in his life, mentioning moving to a mansion instead of a cramped and gloomy room. It was important for Thanasia to change the course of events in the plot, as she knew it inside and out. She also applied for the promotion of Ascana's position to the personal page of the mistress. Hearing this, the young man was somewhat puzzled by the behavior of the lady, who turned out to be not who she had previously pretended to be. He could not hide his emotions towards the girl and clearly revealed his hatred for Thanasia. Despite the fact that he had to stay close to his master, who is unpleasant to him, he still obeys her. The heroine planned to keep him close to her in order to correct mistakes and change the boyfriend's attitude. She asked to pack his things, but Ascan didn't have many things and everything fit into one small bag. From that moment on, Thanasia asked to be treated like a lady, not a hostess, in order to gain favor. The girl introduced her new page to her maid, and his presence by his side is invariable. The maids, being aware of the character of the mistress, received the news of Ascana with alarm and shock. The heroine commissioned the tailor to make a new wardrobe in connection with a radical change in the image of her new servant, and she asked her assistants to do her hair so that Ascan looked neater. After leaving the dressing room, a completely different person stood in front of the girls, who did not even look like a servant. During lunch, Thanasia offered to have lunch and asked one of the butlers to teach him the rules of etiquette for the future. Ascan did not betray a single emotion. She believed that he would get better, but everything was unsuccessful. Thanasia offered to take a walk and refresh herself, clearing her thoughts. She immediately sat down and asked me to sit on the opposite side to rest. The guy looked at the sky, which was covered with bright stars. He lowered his gaze and turned it to his mistress, who was smiling in front of him. Ascan began a dialogue about Thanasia's methods when she asked him to strip Noxia of her special powers. And in case of failure in the experiments, the mistress ordered to get rid of her sister. The girl did not believe his words and that she had plans to kill her own sister. She was aware of the actions of the past, because due to a bad attitude, they led to a loss of trust. Before she began to behave well in front of him, she apologized for her past misdeeds, which surprised Ascan to his surprise. She told about her accident when she was riding a horse, because of which the heroine lost her memory and asked to trust her. Hearing these words, the young man covered his face with his hands. It was uncomfortable for him to see the mistress in a different guise. The next day, Thanasia remembered yesterday and racked her brains over how to win over Ascan. She was interrupted from her reflections by Metella, the math teacher in the family house, who suggested that she return to the problems. The examples that were written on the blackboard seemed very easy to her. In her previous life, she was distinguished by her intelligence. The delighted teacher brought a couple of books and asked about the complexity of the examples, since before losing her memory, Thanasia could not solve any of the given examples. The reason why the girl in the original noticed the experiment with a person was that she was able to read the formulas. But she didn't develop her talent in mathematics any further because she was obsessed with Noxia's power, so she paid all her attention to her. The teacher was glad that the lady had a good mindset and wanted to share it with the head of the family, and Thanasia did not mind, wanting to make him happy. The heroine walked in the garden with Ascan and rejoiced at her choice, thanks to which hope for success settled in her. At that moment, Thanasia was completely soaked by the sudden water flow, and then she heard a familiar voice. It was her younger sister, Noxia, who looked worried for her sister. Ascan was also doused with water and offered the girl a handkerchief to help get rid of moisture at least a little. In the original novel, there was exactly the same scene when Noxia made a mistake by showing her strength, and knowing the reason, Thanasia did not hold a grudge against her. The younger sister was shocked by how gently the heroine reacted and was slightly embarrassed by this simplicity. Thanasia advised the servants not to ask for more demonstrations of Noxia's power in such places so as not to be uncomfortable. The girl approached the heroine and once again asked for forgiveness for fixing the situation for her. Thanasia paid attention to Ascan standing next to her, and through her wet shirt, scars were visible on him, and said goodbye to her sister. As she watched Thanasia, Noxia noticed the fluctuation of her gaze and the way it darkened, which made her sister worry again. Going inside, the heroine asked Ascan to take off her outerwear and sit down on the bed for examination. The girl was worried because she guessed about the occurrence of these scars and that she was the culprit and felt a deep sense of guilt. Having found a cure and a healing ointment, Thanasia turned to the guy, who was already sitting on his knees and waiting for something. He stood in his usual stance as the girl whipped him on his bare back. Approaching from the back, she began to rub the ointment on his scars and other bruises. Her actions surprised Arsan. Thanasia touched his back with annoyance, feeling the pain she had caused him. She could not pretend that she did not understand his pain and wanted to be kinder to him in order to prepare insurance for the future. At night, the heroine talked about the plan to prevent her death and how she could leave the war with her abilities. Avoiding war entailed many things. First of all, Thanasia's family would not be exterminated, and there would be no story when Askan killed her. These thoughts haunted her all night, and she sat reading her books until morning, when she was woken up by one of the servants. The heroine was invited to dine next to her father, and this alarmed her a little. Walking through the corridors of the house, the girl was worried about her father, since she had not yet seen him live. The head of the family, Orland, has a brilliant mind and a cold-blooded character. It was he who raised the reputation of the family, thanks to his possession in negotiations. But despite the image of a cold-blooded man, he was very kind to his daughters and did not let them be offended. She preferred to act natural and not show signs of fear. Approaching the table, the man was already waiting for her arrival and asked to sit next to her with a smile. The father's youth spoke for itself, since he became engaged with his wife quite early. Before the start of the meal, the head of the family had to postpone his work, because he wanted to give a small gift to Thanasia. He wanted to reward his daughter for her math achievements, which the teacher shared with him. Her father asked her to think about her future and promised to do everything possible to satisfy his daughter's desires by inviting her to a banquet. Thanasia remembered this banquet for the fact that Noxia would fall in love with the prince at the festival. This man was Rochelle. They fell in love with each other from the first meeting, which was the birth of love. In the past, the heroine tried with all her might to separate them, but this time she offered to give the gift with the necklace to her sister to bring them closer. In addition to the gift, she decided to help choose a dress that would go well for the banquet, and Noxia was happy. The father noted the good relationship between the daughters and asked the servant to prepare another necklace. Askin watched the entire conversation. He watched each member of the family from the sidelines. But his eyes were fixed on Thanasia. He did not take his eyes off her. Thanasia noticed this, and looking straight into his eyes, she smiled softly towards him. This smile encouraged the guy and caused mixed feelings inside him. At night, Askin was tormented by nightmares that haunted him every time and was never distinguished by its content. The guy was running away from the men in black who were chasing him, but he fell to the ground. Two men surrounded him, laughing at his escape attempts. One of them even promised to find the guy soon and subdue him. This terrified him. After escaping from the lab, Askan couldn't sleep peacefully and didn't remember when he had a good dream. He knew that he would only be able to escape when Thanasia's whims were over and everything was back to normal. Being in this house guaranteed Askana safety from pursuers. They will not be able to stay in the vicinity for a long time, and it is much more difficult to get into the Brilov's estate. Two guys called out to the servant. They were his acquaintances, with whom he often worked when he was still an ordinary worker. He ignored them, and his silence was regarded as arrogance and hit him on the head with a tool. They continued to insult him, that very soon he would not be needed and he would be thrown away as garbage. Askin knew that he shouldn't have given power to his emotions, as his peculiarity could take a life. In the laboratory, he was told about a force that is difficult to control and that he is a ticking time bomb. He could silence the men with confidence, but once his power came out, Askin wouldn't be able to stop. But behind him came the voice of the lady, who was dissatisfied with the statements of the workers. The guy was surprised by Tanasaya's presence. She watched them and endured the insults for a very long time. And I was not very happy about what kind of people work in this house and what they allow themselves. The men began to apologize to her, but the girl asked that an apology be made to Askin as well. She warned them about her character in the future. She would not allow them to speak about him like that. The guy was overwhelmed with emotions. He did not understand his importance in the face of the mistress and did not know her intentions, asking to be left alone. But Thanasia asked him to hurry up, as Noxia was waiting in the carriage, and Askan allowed himself to stay at home. The girl did not want this, because his presence at the banquet was mandatory. The young man was in a state of confusion, not knowing how to react to her words, and agreed. Though he didn't like company, he did his best for the lady's sake. While in the boutique with Noxia, she was brought many dresses that looked more like her sister's style than hers. She warned the head of the boutique that the girl's tastes had changed and another dress would suit her. One of the employees brought a tray of tea, and she could not hold it as her hands were shaking with fear. But everything went wrong when one of the workers accidentally spilled tea on Thanasia, ruining her clothes. Askin approached her, who carefully brushed the moisture from the hem of his dress, worried that the shards of the cup might fall on the mistress. It was the first time she had seen such a picture of a guy showing such emotions lately, and put her hand on his head. The young man could only remain silent at the moment of Thanasia's affection. The workers lined up in front of her, apologizing, waiting for punishment, which made the girl sit in a stupor. She admitted that in the past she did not have the best character, and Thanasia could not think that she had hit a boutique worker. Everyone around them fell silent, as if they were already used to this, and the girl sighed heavily. Thanasia accepted the apology and asked only to pay for the dry cleaning of the dress and to compensate for the damage caused. When they left the atelier, the workers apologized again and saw the girl off. The leader noticed the betrayals in Tanasai's behavior, suggesting that public opinion about her would also change. In the carriage, Thanasia reflected on the actions of her past and could not imagine how many atrocities she had committed in different places. Askin continued to sit in the carriage and watched his mistress as if waiting for something. He recalled her earlier words and did not understand the intentions, which were very annoying. Then the girl understood why the guy was behaving so carefully, since it was the first time he had shown care. He did not deny it, and the heroine did not think about it, because in the novel Askin seemed mature, but now he is just a child. And Thanasia wanted to show more kindness and respect on her part. Hearing this, the young man was stunned with surprise. When Noxia arrived home, she was approached by worried maids, asking about the trip with her older sister. They speculated why Thanasia decided to choose a beautiful dress, humiliating her at the ball if possible. The girls said that the eldest was going to deceive and spoil the dress she would wear, but Noxia didn't jump to conclusions and noticed how different her sister was from her old self as she remembered what had happened. Her sister was kind to her for the first time since the girl's abilities were discovered. She thanked the servants for their concern, asking them not to speak of Thanasia in this way in the future. Noxia believed that the girl had changed and put her hand on her head, dreaming of affection from her sister. Thanasia was ridiculed by those around her every time, who always compared her and Noxia to each other. One of the servants inadvertently collided with the girl, and she called her to follow her. She hit the maid, thinking that she was taunting her in the same way. It was another dream that was no different from the others. The day of the imperial ball came, and it took a lot of time to prepare it. Askin was waiting for Thanasia, and she complimented him on his appearance and the way he shone even more. The guy was embarrassed and said that recently the girl had become straightforward in her expressions. When they reached the street, Noxia was waiting for them in the carriage, who was glad to see her sister. Thanasia invited her to go with her and was glad to spend at least a little time with her. Arriving at the banquet, the girl was subjected to another attack from the guests and listened to gossip, from which she went away. As soon as the heroine left, Askin overheard one of the conversations where the girls reproach her for imitating her sister. The guy wanted to intervene in the conversation, but his attention was attracted by one of the shouts that was coming from inside the hall. He saw Thanasia, who was dissatisfied with the gossip that the unknown girl was spreading. She threatened her with retribution if she continued to say words that defamed the name of her family. The heroine noticed Askin, who was standing nearby, and asked to accompany him to the street to freshen up. When they went outside, the girl breathed a sigh of relief. The young man inquired about the reality of the recent threats, and Thanasia admitted that this was only a warning. He had always seen her horrible behavior in the mansion, but this was the first time a guy had seen a girl be humiliated. In the society of the nobility, where prominent people are showered with compliments and the weak are mercilessly humiliated, Thanasia was on the side of the weak among them. But when she rebuffed her offenders, in Askin's eyes, his mistress encouraged him and could not understand what exactly he liked. Such crowded places had never caught the young man, but after looking at the girl, this situation did not hate him. At one point, sounds were heard next to them, from which Thanasia knocked the guy to the ground, ordering him not to move. She heard two men talking, and one of them seemed painfully familiar to her. It was Rochelle, the crown prince and future lover of Noxia in the novel. He talked to his ward and wished to make his empire stronger, not going to continue playing in relationships. The man hinted at the importance of creating a relationship between Noxia's family. Rochelle did not like her, although he would try to smear himself with her. Suddenly, the girl herself came out into the yard and caught Tanasaya and Ascana in the bushes, who were eavesdropping on the conversation. They were also noticed by the prince, who was surprised that someone had heard them and was unhappy that his plan had been declassified. He hadn't expected that their conversation would reach other people's ears, since they were far enough away from the hall. As the men approached, Noxia introduced herself and explained that she had not been able to find her sister. The guy tried to make amends to her for his words, which she could misunderstand. Noxia did not want to listen to him because she had heard the conversation from beginning to end and was of the same opinion as Rochelle. The girl took Thanasia's hand and led her away, leaving the men alone. Rochelle followed them with his eyes and could not imagine that the plan could be spoiled. Thanasia blamed herself for not being able to bring them together now and that further actions would be useless. When the girls moved away, they stopped to discuss what they had heard. Noxia turned to her sister and asked if she was upset after what she had said at the banquet. The girl said that in the ballroom many people approached her and spoke rudely towards Thanasia. The heroine was not surprised by what happened, and she was more worried about her life than about her emotional wounds. She wanted to cheer Noxia up and tried to let her know that she had misunderstood the prince's words. Rochelle is a rather vain guy who was a strategist, never losing in staged fights. He was the object of adoration among girls, due to his appearance, who loved him behind his eyes. The enthusiasm with which Thanasia talked about the prince, Noxia concluded that she liked him, surprising her sister. The heroine wanted to change her mind about the prince so that there would be no more misunderstanding between them. The girl almost agreed to go to Rochelle and listen to his explanations when suddenly one of the guests approached them. She reminded Noxia of the show she wanted to put on for the guests, showing off her water control abilities. Thanasia knew what would happen next and began to worry about her sister. After all, there was a certain reason why Rochelle and Noxia began to be attracted to each other. It was the villain from the novel, Leon. She wanted to humiliate the girl and therefore blew up the confetti crackers when she showed the control of the water. When she lost her control, the one who prevented Noxia from being doused was Rochelle, who took the hit. Thanasia wanted to stop her and postpone the performance for later, as everything could not go according to the novel's plan. The girl decided to retreat and followed her sister with her eyes. She ordered Ascan to find Leana urgently, under the pretext of meeting in person to stop her. Thanasia hated Noxia along with her, and being on the same side, they had a friendly relationship. By the time she spoke, Leana was already in the hall to signal her servants to detonate the firecrackers. Now the most important thing was to distract her attention and buy time. After listening to the mistress, Ascan agreed to help her and would do his best. She was supposed to find Rochelle and bring him to his sister and try to persuade him to talk, but everything did not go according to plan. And the girl was again waiting for failure, which would have consequences. Before the show began, she looked for him in the banquet hall so that Rochelle could help support his sister. This was so that Noxia could demonstrate her abilities so that he could protect her. What was happening was different from the original, and the lady turned to the guy to settle the conflict and asked him to go to Noxia. The show had already begun, and they stood together behind the crowd, their eyes fixed on their sister. There was admiration on the guy's face. He was interested in Noxia's abilities. The girl noticed one of the butlers, in whose hands a firecracker was prepared. Wasting no time, Thanasia invited Rochelle to come closer so that he could see well. As soon as they began to approach, one of the firecrackers went off ahead of time, and the unexpected happened. Noxia lost control and cried out in fright, causing the water to pour in all directions. One of the victims was Rochelle. He was doused with water, and he did not consider the incident as an accident, but for a setup from the girls. He was approached by Noxia, who apologized and justified herself by saying that she was simply frightened by the sound. He was unhappy and said that the twins were worth each other and that they had worked well together to embarrass him. Thanasia wanted to intervene in the conflict, but they both asked not to intervene. As she walked away, she couldn't find Ascan, who was supposed to take care of the culprit. She found a guy standing at the closed door, waiting for his mistress. As soon as the girl approached him, the lady's pitiful cries were heard outside the door. Thanasia was surprised, and Ascan leaned over and confirmed the successful execution of the plan. He said that he did everything as the mistress said and lured her into the room, only outside the door the screams changed to blows. The girl praised Ascana's perfect work and was grateful to him. Upon entering the room, an angry Leanna stood in front of them, turning the room upside down. She was not happy that the servant dared to close the door behind her and deceive her. Thanasia began to defend Ascan, since he was not to blame and did everything at her request. The girl admitted that she did all this in order to meet her and talk. But she didn't believe her, as she knew about Leon's plans and had deliberately interfered. She apologized and said that everything went well and the firecrackers went off without her presence. When Leanna calmed down and came to her senses, the heroine turned to her, as one thing did not leave her alone. Thanasia was interested in why the prepared firecrackers worked ahead of time. The girl with a satisfied face admitted that it had been discussed in advance and that the explosion had occurred even without a signal. Hearing the right words, she confirmed her thoughts that what was happening was different from the novel. In order to somehow make amends to her, the heroine invited her to take a walk together. But she refused and promised to meet another time. As soon as she left, Leanna tested her strength, which had not worked well before. The girl did not control her abilities so well and did not receive recognition in the family. She was rejected. She was more shocked by the strong bond between Noxia and Thanasia, which they hated together. She was furious that she had been deceived by her and had prepared a plan for revenge. The next day, the heroine pondered over the events that had happened and how the relationship affected the plot. The incident at the ball showed that there had been a shift and she needed a guarantee to prevent war. She wanted to rest, but the teacher came into the room with a large cart of books. The woman wanted to help the mistress decide on a career path in the future, but Thanasia was not interested in any of the areas that the teacher suggested. One of the books she liked was a manual on magical engineering in the creation of weapons intended for war. This was her lifeline for safety in the future. After all, as long as Ascan was in the Brelov family, experiments with human weapons would not be successful. She had something to prepare for in the worst case. The girl asked to hire a mentor who would help in learning. On the streets of the Empire, 2 men in black robes desperately searched for a missing man. They were mercenaries from the Kahlua Empire sent by the laboratory. They needed to find the guy who showed the best result and ran away without a trace. Suddenly, white fireworks appeared in the sky. For them, it marked the end of the search and that no one had found the fugitive. Ascan was working in the yard at that time, running errands from the mansion. One of the maids called out to him, asking him to look after the child. The kid addressed him as a brother, which brought back bad memories for him. When he was in the lab, Ascan spent a long time in solitary confinement. A few years later, a couple of children with the same abilities were placed with him. At first, he did not care about the new roommates, but after a while he managed to get acquainted with them. Despite the indifferent attitude, the children treated him sincerely and innocently. For the first time, he felt human warmth on himself, and each time he opened his heart to them. Each of them told how they got here and where their family is now. He was upset that most of the children were orphans, or those whose parents wanted to get rid of. He remembered what he was like as a child and wanted to protect his children. But one day, one girl became ill because of the experiments carried out on her. Ascan knew how scientists had bullied them and what side effects they left behind, which made him angry. But protecting all the children was an impossible task, and he did not want to give the girl for experiments. He grabbed her hand, begging the man to leave her alone and not take her away. The scientist slapped the girl for disobedience and offered Ascan to take the test for her. The guy was confused, as he had to go through all the torment for all the children in this cell. He was willing to go for it, having gone through dozens of experiments in a row, which caused his body to change rapidly. Ascan was in the dark for a long time and did not know what was happening to the children during his absence, and when he returned to the cell, he did not find them. The guy asked the scientist about the fate of the children and where they are now. The man replied that they had been used in experiments, and Ascan was angry with him because he had not fulfilled his promise. He pointed to one child and he said that the children were brought on a cart, which horrified the guy. After a while, the boy died in his arms, and Ascan continued to be subjected to constant experiments. The laboratory made him neither alive nor dead, bringing unbearable physical pain. There was nothing left for him to do, and he decided to escape, which he managed to do thanks to his body. Even after his escape, he didn't have a quiet life, but lately, his views had changed to one of appeasement. Remembering Thanasia, he was inspired and noticed that she had become a completely different person. The girl sat in the library and read most of the books on magical engineering to learn something. She learned about magical weapons and information about the difference between magic stones, which had different elements. Since it used magical power, its presence set the power, and thus national power was estimated by the number of magicians. The girl's problem was her lack of capable people or magical weapons. In the novel, Askan originally controlled the unquenchable blue fire, and this power was intended for war. Therefore, Thanasia was given the task of creating a universal weapon that can be used by everyone. The girl wondered about creating weapons, or the ability to gather the right number of people. Next to her was a teacher who brought her a magic bracelet that the mistress had asked for. And at that moment she introduced the new teacher, the girl saw familiar features in him. It was Varnin. He is the author of a book on magical engineering. A man with a confident face confirmed her words. Thanasia was glad to see him and sincerely rejoiced that he would be the one who would teach her magic. Varnin was aware of the mistress's undertakings, but his hatred for her family remained unchanged, calling the hobby an ordinary hobby. He was about to leave, but the girl stopped him and wanted to ask him about the book and the words he meant to create weapons. The man did not understand the heroine's interest in this book, which is why Thanasia asked not to underestimate her abilities. She looked at him with a look full of purpose and determination to learn all the aspects and subtleties of engineering. The man nevertheless agreed to teach the girl and is ready to cooperate with her. One of the maids came into the room, informing the girl of Lady Leon's arrival, and she was surprised. Thanasia asked me to tell her to wait for her arrival in the living room. As soon as the maid explained the situation to the guest, she was dissatisfied with ignoring her own person. The girl tried to tell her about the mistress's amusement and that she would come as soon as she was free, but Leona only got angrier. When the maid left, the girl fell into a rage, as it was beneficial for her to build a close relationship with Thanasia. Askan knocked on the door, and when the lady opened the door, they were both surprised. The guy was as surprised as the girl and did not know how to react. She recognized him and how he treated her at the imperial ball and came up with a plan for revenge. Leona took him roughly by the shirt and pulled him towards her, noticing her joy at meeting him. The girl remembered how Thanasia treated the servants who did not listen to her and how she beat them. She thought it fair that she put the servant who had harmed her in his place, and Askan already had a premonition of what was about to happen. In the library, Thanasia showed a drawing of a weapon in the form of a pistol, which the teacher liked and asked to explain the method of work. She gave an accurate description of how the pistol worked, but it was small and didn't have a decent amount of power. After listening to the explanation, Varnin corrected the drawing and made a verdict that he was ready to take the lady as an apprentice. He asked to borrow a bracelet that the teacher once bought to give homework to work out. When they finished talking, Thanasia hurried to Leona, but she was attracted by a loud scream that came from inside the room. Opening the doors, the girl who had beaten Askan stood in front of her. She showed how the bat works, which was intended as a gift for the heroine, and defiantly wanted to hit the guy. But as soon as the girl hit him, the body made a metal sound that confused her. Before she knew it, Thanasia approached her and slapped her in the face, leaving a trail of a slap in the face. Leona screamed and did not expect such audacity from the girl. She stood over it and wanted to swing it, but she only cast a haughty glance at her and was disappointed by her shamelessness. The heroine warned that if in the future she dares to touch the people of this house, she will not just leave it. Leona was shocked by what she heard and did not understand how a girl could treat her like this, using her status. As soon as she left, Thanasia hurried to Askan, who asked about her actions and why the lady stood up for him. He looked at her with a pitiful face, not understanding the lady's concern for herself. The girl continued to look at him with concern, waiting for him to finish talking, but the guy lost consciousness. He had a dream in which he was still being chased by men in black, but Thanasia appeared from somewhere and saved him. The heroine immobilized him, forcing him not to commit stupid actions. She asked him not to make noise, promising to help the young man. Askan woke up in the room and lay there with a slight blush on his face. He did not notice the mistress next to him, who took care of his well-being. The guy asked about what had happened and asked not to worry about him. The girl put her hand on his forehead, taking the temperature, but Askan asked him to remove it, as he was uncomfortable. She opened his shirt to assess the injuries Leona had inflicted and reminded him of her words of immunity to her servant. Askin was embarrassed to see her next to his face and the sincerity with which she cared for it. The heroine could not tolerate when someone close to her was hurt. He noticed a bracelet on the girl's hand and advised her to take it off, as it was dangerous. Looking at the bracelet, the guy said that he had an attribute of light and silver was chosen as the material, which did not suit him. There is a reason for creating such a bracelet. Worrying about the mistress, the girl decided to leave him alone and asked him to call her if he felt bad. Askin repeated Thanasia's words in a circle and began to yearn for her when he would soon have to leave home. While the young man was recovering, the heroine thought about doing her homework. She thought about the meaning of the work. Varnon would not give a task that put her life in danger. This bracelet did not have an owner, and the only option was to disassemble the jewelry, and Thanasia decided to try her guess. The heroine had not left the room for quite some time, causing Askin, who was walking straight towards her, worried. As it turned out, the girl did not leave the room for a long time. He threatened to denounce the head of the family that his daughter was malnourished. Then she would be in trouble. She did not want to upset her father and be distracted from work, but still opened the door to meet him. Seeing her unhealthy appearance, Askin was upset and was not happy to see her poor condition. The servant led the mistress to the dining room and could not take him out for a conversation, receiving only a deviation from answers. When he wanted to leave, he asked the girl to eat well, even if she had to eat alone. These words made her think, as it was strange, and she became worried. The girl was wary of the words said and wanted to distract herself. She wanted to talk to him if possible, deciding that the guy wanted to leave home. In the evening, Thanasia decided to take a walk in the park to test the strength of the bracelet. The heroine was looking for a quiet place so as not to attract unnecessary attention to herself and conduct a test where there are no people. Suddenly, the voice of a man sounded, who noticed someone's movement in the forest. One of the knights, Jen, who served the girl's house, came out from behind the tree. He was one of the most experienced swordsmen in the empire, and the girl wanted to explain herself to him. But on the other side, Askin came out. She didn't understand what he was doing here at such a time. He was standing in front of the knight and did not notice her. It turned out that Jen was addressing not the mistress, but the servant. She did not understand how this could happen. The girl noticed the bag that Askin had come with, and the lady guessed that he wanted to leave the palace. Thanasia realized this and wanted to save the young man, which is why she had to activate the bracelet. There was a sudden bright flash of light that blinded the men. The guy, trying to break through the bright light, tried to determine the source of its origin. She grabbed the young man and asked him to follow her. The power of the bracelet transported them to the palace, and the lady led him into the room. Magic was necessary because Jen had no weaknesses and therefore it was useless to fight him. Askin was thinking about an escape plan and how to break free from her mistress's grasp, but Thanasia beat him to it. They hid in her room and the girl demanded an explanation. The young man could not say anything in response. She suspected that he had escaped. He suspected that Thanasia could be accused of ingratitude, no matter how good the relationship between them was. The heroine knew about his plan and admitted that she was sad to part with him, putting jewelry in a bag. He was shocked when he heard that the mistress offered him to rob the house and run away. Thanasia listened with annoyance to how Askin did not understand her motives, because she had often beaten him before. She took his hands and admitted with a smile that she no longer wished him harm. The heroine saw him not as an ordinary servant, but as a man who deserved freedom. Hearing a sound in the hallway, Thanasia threw a cloak over him and promised to take him out of the mansion later. The girl ordered him to return to the room, and if he was noticed, then let him transfer it to the order of the mistress. She continued to hold the guy by the clothes, speaking in a frustrated voice about the imminent separation as their relationship began to improve. They stood opposite each other for a long time. The girl did not want to let Askin go. Thanasia admitted that she would prefer to protect him as long as he is around. After saying goodbye to her, Askin walked down the corridor, scrolling through the mistress's words. Her words touched him to the core, and he pondered his decision with an embarrassed face. The next morning, Thanasia sat alone and remembered the previous night. There was a sharp knock on the door, and a familiar person stood in front of the door. It was Gina, who had come to notify the mistress of her visit to her father. The head of the family was concerned about yesterday's events, as he was aware that one of the servants had tried to escape and had disappeared using magic. Thanasia decided to hide part of the truth and told about her practice in magic. He believed her, but the father asked his daughter not to take any more risks and not to go out so late. Distracting from the topic, the heroine asked the man to build a production laboratory for study. He was surprised when he found out that one of his daughters began to get seriously interested in something. This laboratory was needed to study magical engineering, as it was inconvenient at home. The man realized how it was connected with what had happened and willingly agreed to help. Jaina was shocked when the gentleman just let go of the incident. He knew perfectly well that his daughter was hiding something, but he only said with a smile that he resembled his daughter. One of the maids came up to him and handed him the tea that Thanasia had prepared especially for him, which made him feel surprised. The heroine still thought about how her father believed her, because he was one of those people for whom trust is the most important part in a relationship. She immediately guessed that if this happened again, Askin would not be able to escape punishment. As soon as she remembered him, he walked into the room. His face showed sleepless nights. Looking at him, the girl felt sorry for the young man and sincerely understood the situation in which he was. Askin said that he had hidden the jewelry well and assured that no one had seen him yesterday. Discussing what had happened at the table, she handed him a map of the area, asking about the further escape plan. She pointed out to the servant various places that were suitable for hiding for a while. But he interrupted her, saying that the mistress was too close and he felt uncomfortable. Thanasia noticed Askana's red face and wanted to take her temperature. He managed to intercept her hand, not knowing that she cared not only for him. Thanasia made it clear that she was just worried about his health. When Askin returned to the room, the guy took jewelry out of his bag every time, lying that he had hidden the jewelry well. He remembered his dream, which was different from the others, and for the first time he did not have nightmares. Instead, he dreamed of a lady who was smiling broadly towards him, flushing into embarrassment every time he saw her in front of him. Thanasia met with 2 workers who were entrusted with the construction of the laboratory. She shared her ideas that she wanted to see a bunker in which there were many passages and it was possible to store food. The heroine wanted to use the building not only for its intended purpose, but also as a shelter for Askan. Outside, Noxia practiced her abilities away from everyone. The girl diligently managed the water, but she looked tired enough, as if she was about to fall. Even though Noxia possesses immense magical power, it doesn't mean that she can use the power without interruption. Suddenly, there was an unexpected scream, from which Thanasia was noticeably frightened. The younger sister grabbed her hand, squeezing it in pain. Coming closer, Thanasia asked to see the hand on which there was a cut. The girl unceremoniously decided to tear off a piece of fabric from her dress to help her sister stop the bleeding. Suddenly, it began to rain and asked her to wait while she called the servants. Her sister, overwhelmed by care and anxiety for Thanasia, tried to restrain her. But she had already managed to leave, promising to return soon. Noxia remained standing under the tree, not risking to say anything against it. In the mansion, the servants were worried about the lady's condition and hurriedly provided first aid. Thanasia heard the maids blaming her for her sister's injury. She wanted to object, but she didn't. But instead of her, Noxia came out, who defended the heroine's good name, saying that she helped her more than the servants. Raising her voice, she previously believed that taking care of employees was a necessary duty, but now her opinion has changed. Noxia took the initiative and would find the right punishment for spreading rumors in the mansion. The maids did not want to upset their mistress, but the lady wanted to be left alone and left. The girl sensed her sister's presence and apologized for the maid's words. She was calm and glad that someone close to her stood up. Thanasia joked that their words did not hurt her, and there was no need to worry about her. She was also interested in why Noxia was training alone. It was all about a quick conference and demonstrating my strength, so it takes a lot of time to train. Every year, people with special talents regularly come together to showcase their achievements. Noxia had always been considered to have the highest potential and was extremely talented. Now the heroine understood that her sister's wound appeared thanks to persistent training, and she became sad. The girl calmly replied that training is a mandatory process and you should not worry about it. Realizing how hard it was for her now, Thanasia patted her on the head and praised her for her efforts. Noxia was happy because it was one of her main desires, to get approval from her sister. The heroine did not hide the fact that she did not want to get involved with her, but having recognized her kindness, she could not just ignore her. The conference was also a significant event for Noxia and Rogel to get to know each other. And in addition to him, she will meet another young man who will also fall in love with her in the future. The girl was interrupted from her thoughts by a disgruntled Varnan, who saw how she was distracted. He threatened that he would not allow her to embarrass him at the conference, which surprised Thanasia. Varnin said that he signed up the heroine for a demonstration, calling her a genius in the field of magical engineering. The man called Thanasia's zeal worthy and called it progress, which, unlike him, took quite a long time. The teacher's words encouraged the girl not to stop working. He held out a drawing that she had once drawn, confirming her words. Varnin said that she did not need to complete the development and would only need to show the drawings of the work, but the girl was not satisfied with this. Thanasia agreed and promised that she would not disappoint him and would continue to develop the weapon. She had been thinking for a long time about improving the pistol and how to increase the power. Asken approached her from behind, who brought her back to earth from her thoughts. They were both surprised and didn't expect to meet each other. Thanasia told with a smile about her plans in which he would participate, inviting him to come to the conference. He was glad that the mistress showed attention to his person and did not forget about him. Asken agreed and did not even refuse, but only asked when the mistress would come back. Since today was the anniversary of the death of Madame Cheryl, the mother of Thanasia and Noxia. As a person who read the original novel, the heroine knew the reason and how her mother died. On this date, the head of the family always spent time with alcohol and did not go out. He was still looking at the photo of his beloved, missing the past. Even after a while, he still remembered how they had met as children. Cheryl was not of the same status as him and was exactly the same worker, but Orland treated her with all love. Their teenage years were filled with mischief and fun times. They were together all the time, and he saw how an ordinary little girl grew into a dazzling girl. In his life, there was no other person with whom he got along as well as with her. Orland loved her with all his heart, and did not risk opening up early. But he hadn't been aware of his feelings for Cheryl for too long, until he found out she was getting married. The man secretly met with her beaux and threatened them, but his lover stopped him. She knew about all the meetings and asked to stop destroying her life, despite how good they were together. He understood that Cheryl was not a woman who could be manipulated, and that this was the most attractive side. The man could not stand and did not realize that his beloved could be with someone else. Having confessed her feelings, the girl considered them a joke. This startled him, and he could not believe the seriousness of her words. Cheryl did not believe that they could be together due to the difference in their statuses, and Orland promised to become strong so that she would realize his intentions. After a long time, which was aimed at strengthening the status of the family, the man finally won Cheryl's favor. The man appreciated every moment spent with the girl and could not believe in reality. They got married and were happy with each other because she was the only one he loved so much. After a while, Thanasia and Noxia were born. He did not want more. He believed that they would spend the remaining years of old age together. But dreams of a wonderful future were shattered when Orland was forced to leave, and during this time, unknown people broke into the house, attacking Cheryl. The last wish was for him to raise his daughters and provide them with a good future. If not for her, the man would have followed her and lowered his hands. Since Cheryl's death, Orland has been investigating and searching for the culprit, but has never found him. Jenno entered the chief's office, who came with a tray for the master. It was food intended especially for him at the request of Thanasia, who was worried about her father. Every day after Cheryl left, it was hell, but Thanasia was like a ray of hope. He didn't even notice what kind of lady his daughter had grown up into. With a tired look, the man accepted Thanasia's care and was grateful. The next day, her father thanked her for the snacks she had prepared that evening. The girl offered to get together next time and smiled sincerely, realizing that he was getting better. The ideal atmosphere of the family, which the heroine lacked so much, swirled around them. Although the memories were hazy, the girl still remembered her childhood. In those days, the young heroine was free from worries, experiencing boundless happiness from every moment of her life. And sometimes memories of Thanasia and time arose in my head, filled with sincere attention and care. In the past, she did not realize what parental love meant. After entering this world, her only goal was to survive, but today she has a new goal, to find the man who killed her mother. Before surviving and finding the culprit, Thanasia needed to complete the gun. She asked Asken to look at the blueprint and share her opinion, calling it unusual. But he advised to strengthen the blowing of fire magic with the help of a windstone to add power to such a small weapon. The girl did not suspect this idea, and how she could not think of it herself, she hugged Asken. She called him a genius because he made it easier for her to explore, and the guy was slightly confused. Askin was just as surprised as the lady and was glad that he had helped. They immediately went to the Varnin shop to report on the progress of the creation of the pistol. Hearing the news, the man was glad that Thanasia was his student and stretched out his hand to pat her on the head. But Askin came up to his arm, who was displeased with the manifestation of excessive concern towards his mistress. When he walked away, they began to discuss assembling the pistol. The heroine was glad that now she would be able to complete her work and glowed with happiness. Varnin listened to the girl, but he was at a loss and ducked. He saw the look his apprentice's servant was looking at him with and didn't understand why the aura had become so ominous. The guy looked at them with a fixed and frightening look. Thanasia suggested that Askin might not be comfortable here as he was staying away from the room. On the way home, the girl asked the guy about his feelings from the laboratory and asked about his well-being. Askin asked if his mistress showed sympathy for the teacher. She began to complain that this was not the case, until she noticed the young man covering his hands. He stretched out his hand and showed how his fingers were covered in steel, and this was due to the display of strong emotions. This caused a lot of discomfort as he couldn't control his strength, and his fingers looked like that from the lab. The girl guessed that his worries and stress caused such a strong reaction with internal energy. Then Askin turned to the lady with an uncomfortable request for him. Whenever he was able to control the outbursts of emotion, he could hope for a small reward. When she asked what he wanted in return, the guy was awkwardly silent. The girl could have assumed, and it is unlikely that he could have wished for something grandiose, and it remained a mystery to her. Askin wanted to know the girl's reaction if he asked for something valuable to her, and she was surprised but agreed anyway. Hearing the affirmative answer, the guy still experienced constraining feelings, although he was satisfied. Thanasia met with the builders of the laboratory again, and they shared that they were able to design the wishes of the mistress. At the same time, the creation of weapons began, and they succeeded, although they were not sure of the work. She was holding her ready-made pistol in her hands, which already contained 2 magic stones. Thanasia could not believe that she had succeeded and had been able to go this far. They decided to test the weapon on prepared targets. Noticing the girl's excitement, Askin offered to shoot first, as it posed less danger to the mistress. She stood with him to demonstrate how to hold him in her hands. He concentrated on the target, feeling excited, but at the same time he remained full of determination. After firing, there was nothing left of the target, and instead of it, there was only ashes. The result shocked the others. No one expected such power from such a small pistol. Thanasia was concerned about the young man's condition because of an unexpected loud shot that could harm him. Askin praised the capabilities of the pistol, noting that despite its size, it has impressive power. He called Thanasia a real genius, as she spent a lot of time and it made her happy. The girl understood that Askin was not one of those who senselessly flattered and was not inclined to empty compliments, which caused a smile on her face. They walked home together, exchanging compliments. During the meal, Noxia and her father were delighted to hear Thanasia's success in successfully testing the weapons. The head of the family was also delighted and proud, realizing that his daughters would participate in the conference and show a decent result. He also announced his presence at the demonstration, sponsoring the participants in his endeavors. Thanasia appreciated his words, as she understood how busy he was and could not pay enough attention to his daughters. In her previous life, the girl did not have a real family and did not know what it was like to feel the interest of parents in the child's education. But now she began to understand the charms of a real family, and the support motivated her to become even stronger. This made the girl throw away all adversity, and she relaxed for the first time in such a long time. On the day of the conference, Thanasia recalled the list of persons involved in relation to Noxia. And one of the servants told him that Leana would also be taking part in the demonstration, which made Askin sink into his temper. He was worried about his mistress, because of him, the relationship between them had deteriorated, and she would take revenge on the lady herself, and not on him. But Thanasia reassured him that she would only be glad, and did not regret that she had quarreled with her. After all, if she tries to tease her somehow, then the girl will demonstrate her strength and superiority. When they went outside, the heroine listened to the others whispering, ridiculing her arrival, and she did not belong here. Looking at Askin, the lady saw the irritation in his face and how worried he was about her reputation. She took him by the hand and led him to a quiet place so that he would not feel out of place. When they left, Askin was able to calm down and rest, without being distracted by unnecessary noise and reproaches from those around him. She asked not to worry about her, since Thanasia was confident in her qualifications, and the words did not hurt her. The girl's words gave Askan confidence, and he was able to proudly straighten his shoulders. Before they could begin, they had to go through an energy measurement mechanism. Noxia had always been at her best, and Thanasia was proud of her sister. Next was Leon. As in the original, her magic power was at an average level. When it was the heroine's turn, her rival looked in her direction with mockery, pressing on the lack of magical powers. Noxia defended her sister, as magical abilities were not a decisive criterion for admission to participate and representing a different field. When Thanasia passed the meter, which showed nothing, and this result was obvious to Leana, which intensified her grins. The heroine took the words of her rival with dignity, showing her independence from someone else's opinion. She was impatiently eager to demonstrate her creation and thereby surpass all others. The measure was followed by a presentation of skills that would prove how much ability had improved since the last conference. Noxia was one of those who would not make you doubt her strength, her demonstration of strength leaving her speechless. She finished her speech to thunderous applause, which gave her sincere pleasure. It was time for Thanasia's weapons to be demonstrated, and she was greeted as a genius in magical engineering. All this was watched by her father, who was dissatisfied with the rudeness with which the invention was spoken of, questioning the status of his family. He asked Jen to take care of the appropriate punishment for those who spread rumors about his daughter. Thanasia chose a target by size to show the power of her invention. The girl was focused on the target, gathering her thoughts to pull the trigger. After firing, the bullet flew at great speed and looked like a volley of fire that shattered the target into pieces. Nothing remained of the stone slab, and the audience was amazed. Seeing what the weapon was capable of, Leana was confused and amazed by the power of the gun like the others. The girl demonstratively showed her weapon to those present and felt a sense of satisfaction from the progress made. Noxia was delighted and openly expressed her admiration for her sister. The sisters were disturbed by Jen, who, on her father's orders, was supposed to bring Thanasia to the office for a conversation. The head of the family was alarmed by his daughter's invention and was amazed at the power it possessed. The girl understood what her father was driving at, because the improvement of weapons meant strengthening the national power of the empire, as well as a threat to others. But she predicted the possibility of a military conflict and took precautions to ensure that the gun was not used for improper purposes. The father was deeply moved that his daughter instantly grasped the meaning of his words and demonstrated complete understanding the first time. He thanked her for her foresight and felt calm and proud of her actions. As she stepped outside, she became the subject of discussion, and she could feel people's attitudes change to admiration. Her attention was attracted by a young man with golden hair and a mask on his face, who was standing under a tree and watching her. It was Prince Dakin. He was the second main character and contender for Noxia's heart after Rochelle. In the original, instead of Thanasia, it was supposed to be her, but now the situation has changed. He wanted to harness Noxia's powers to further his ambitions and become the next emperor of the empire. Dakin was interested in Thanasia, and without taking his eyes off her, he came close to her. She decided to play along, as she knew his true and innate nature as a seducer, arousing interest in the man's mask. This mask performed not only a decorative function, but also served as an important attribute of disguising the personality. But stretching out his hand closer, he said that he could show the face of his beloved, subtly hinting at Thanasia. The girl was imbued with his words and called the situation romantic, thus trying to strengthen their relationship. Dakan was about to say something, but he was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Askan, who was looking for Thanasia, watching them from the sidelines. He felt anxious for his mistress and began to examine the young man with an appraising look. Before leaving, the man admitted that he was waiting for the next meeting and the opportunity to address the girl informally. When they left, Dakin said something about Thanasia and Askan heard it, but he managed to leave, causing irritation on his face. The guy was the only one who heard what the prince said. He compared the girl to the mistress, making plans about wanting to submit to her. In the room, they met with a maid, who kindly offered Thanasia to go to replenish her strength, and she agreed. But when they arrived, their meeting was not without incident, when the girl deliberately stepped on the dress of one of Leanna's friends. Thanasia looked down on her, attributing her mistake to a pure accident, which angered the girl. Leanna couldn't miss an opportunity to belittle the lady's act, calling her shameless and that she should apologize. She approached her former friend, calling it mercy compared to how she behaved in the Brelovs' house. Calling it gratitude for the change in appearance, the girl walked away, leaving on herself the furious looks of haters. This trick infuriated Leon. She did not want to just leave Thanasia unpunished. Her gaze involuntarily rested on Ascana, who was sitting nearby, and at that moment she had an idea and a plan for revenge. She remembered her visit and noticed how protective she was of her servants, and that perhaps one of them had magic. Since she herself spoke about her weakness, saying about the immunity of her subordinates, revealing her vulnerability. Taking the knife in her hands, Leanna invited her friends to express their emotions on the servant, to show their feelings, and teach the main character a lesson. The next day, Thanasia was supposed to be an observer at the testing of other participants, instead of her father. She tried unsuccessfully to get out of sight, showing no desire to participate in it. But Dakin appeared, who pulled the girl to him to hide her from everyone's attention. He was also interested in investing in the development of weapons, and Thanasia immediately understood his motives and refused his offer. It was important for her to know how the Prince of the Empire would use weapons, and this was closely related to missing people. And at that moment, Ascan appeared, who was clearly displeased with the presence of Dakin next to the mistress. He showed interest in his personality and was surprised to note the fact that the guy was her personal servant. Behind Ascan's back, Varnan appeared, desperately looking for the girl and calling her his consistency. A dialogue arose between Dakin and the young man, in which the prince advised him to renounce Thanasia and not to attract unnecessary attention to himself. He was well aware that he could not love someone whose status was higher. But the guy believed that over time, his heart would overflow with feelings. Ascana called out to a familiar voice, and behind him stood a lot of people he didn't know. Turning to the gathering, he saw a familiar face. It was Leon, who wanted to talk to him. At the same time, Thanasia consulted with the teacher and her father about the attitude received from Dakin. The girl said that his empire was interested in buying magical weapons to use for personal purposes. Everyone saw with their own eyes how great Thanasia's potential in creating weapons was, and their interest was justified. The girl picked up the idea and offered to include a ban on borrowing technology in the contract, as they could go into the wrong hands. The father encouraged his daughter, approved of her words, believing that she was thinking in the right direction. He entrusted her with the responsibility of managing the revenues, and her father's decision was an honor for her. Thanasia wanted to hurry up to share the news with Ascan, who said that he needed to go to the stables and was not around. She froze, gripped by worry and anxiety, believing that he had already returned and nothing had happened to him. Upon hearing about the attack on her personal servant and his kidnapping, Thanasia guessed who was behind it. Anxiously, she grabbed the girl's hands and began to ask her about the whereabouts of the servant. The young man was beaten by a crowd of people, as a result of which he received severe injuries that made it impossible for him to move. Leanna took his chin, taking pleasure in his anguish and the pain he was experiencing. She planned to let him go on the condition that he beg for mercy, but Ascan was cool and showed no emotion. She didn't want to let him go and took the initiative, wondering if his body could withstand the pain of the cuts. The girl swung her hand at him, but her actions were interrupted by the heroine, who stood in the way of the attack. It was Thanasia who took the blow, and the startled Ascan instantly grabbed her lifeless body.